Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next installment of Horror Not Horror, where we have a look at horror entertainment within otherwise non-horror franchises. And today is something of a special episode because we are looking at the world of magic and illusion. We're looking at the world of Derren Brown and Derren Brown's Seance show. My name's Ash Price. I'm a paranormal illusionist, so that's very much in keeping with the type of stuff that Brown does. I'm also the co-founder and chair of the Edinburgh Horror Festival. I am, as always, joined today by...
My name's Oliver Jiggins. I am one of the founders of the Edinburgh Horror Festival and the writer of several shows about mediumship, none of which you can see at the moment because the apocalypse is ongoing.
And we have a very special guest with us this episode, Ross Hepburn. Ross, welcome, and care to introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about you.
How's it going? Hello, my name is Ross Hepburn, and I'm a writer, and I'm known for writing a solo stand-up show called Ross Hepburn is Beetlejuiced. But I'm currently working on writing horror stories for children, an anthology theatre piece, and various murder, mystery, crime stories that I want to be working on just now. So yeah, I'm a writer and just all around busybody.
So, Ross, you and I have been speaking about discussing this for quite some time. Derren Brown's Seance. We have watched it separately quite a few times. We've watched it together quite a few times. In fact, between us, we spent a good year getting through all of Derren's television published and DVD materials, and we always came back to Seance. Seance was something we always came back to. So you and I, we've discussed this before, and we're going to discuss it in great detail here again. But Oliver, I'm guessing you probably haven't seen it quite as often as Ross and I have. So what are your instant takes on Seance?
Well, I have seen it twice because I think you and I watched it together at some point a few years ago.
I may possibly watched it at some point.
Yeah, it was probably in the build-up to Keep Calm and Scary On, actually. But I thought it was really good. It worked really well. It's got some... the concept of it works, and the whole ending is also very good, which I will avoid giving details about now. But yeah, really, really enjoyable. He's good value, Derren Brown.
Yes. Ross, this is one of our favourite pieces of entertainment generally. Tell us, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think out of anything that Derren Brown has ever done in his career, his biggest strength is playing to the dark. He's always better when he does darker material. He's always better when he does darker tricks and darker subject matter. Like in the later years, he's sort of gone towards a much more optimistic and hopeful and very much a happy sort of mediumship that he's going towards. But with Seance, he genuinely performs one of the darkest and most controversial routines that you could do as a medium, because on one hand, you know, he starts in an interesting way. He starts the episode by saying, I don't believe in any of this. None of this is real, but I'm going to prove to you that I can get people to believe in it or not. And you're just like, but no, that's insane. You cannot, if you know that you're not convinced by it, how are you going to convince others that you're going to do it? And then by the end of it, you forget, you're roped into it. You're just like, holy shit, I forgot that I was watching a guy that was doing this fake, and I believed every second of it. Partly because of the situation and the story and the fact of the naivety of the volunteers who came in out of this pure experiment just to be tortured for the better part of 45 minutes. And by the end, you're just like, I feel for them. I hope they're okay.
So my favourite thing about that little introduction that he does is he introduces it, tells you who the people are. They're not stooges, they're not in on it. This is an old building. And of my 12 volunteers, by the end of this evening, all but one of them will be dead. And it's just such a wonderful, light-hearted way to start this evening. I've always found it fantastic. And out of everything that Derren Brown does, because I'm a mentalist myself, of course, Derren Brown, currently the world's most famous mentalist, is an influence on what I do. But his darker stuff, like you say, I agree with. I think his darker material is his best material. And if I go back and watch his back catalogue, it's always the darker routines that draw me in the most. And so Seance specifically is probably the biggest impact on my career. I quite possibly would not be doing the type of things I do without such an influence as Seance. Everything that came out of it really engaged me and really did influence the directions I took. So and beyond that, it is a wonderful piece of material. It's classic Derren. He'd been at his peak around this time. I think he'd just done. I think his previous special was the Russian Roulette, which got rave reviews and hugely controversial. And he'd done a few series of Trick of the Mind and Mind Control. And this Seance is peak Derren. Seance is Derren Brown at his best. So we all kind of have a good understanding of the world of Victorian seances. Oliver has been assisting me for the better part of 5 years, I think, with this type of stuff. And Ross, you've been to see pretty much every show I think I've done. So we're all kind of familiar with that world. What is it about Derren Brown's seance that really draws you in as an audience member watching it? Either of you?
I'll go first. I think for me, it's more the idea that, Derren pretty much establishes, again, it's one of those things from early on, he just goes, yep, it's not real. Like, he makes you, he knows, and the thing that he shows you the history of how the whole thing came about with the Fox sisters, and how they invented spiritualism and all of its wonderful glories. And the whole, it is old-fashioned techniques. He's not doing anything modern. I mean, sure, the tricks that he's doing are updated for today's standards and are continuing to be updated, but it's not like they're anything fanciful that require anything like wire work or anything like that. It is all simple mind suppression and all that sort of stuff. He's able to make people convinced that this is what's real and you are feeling what is absolute fear.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go on. I interrupted you.
Yeah, but if you look at something like, say, okay, so he has the spirit cabinet, and in a modern way, the spirit cabinet in today's time, you're going to be like, look, come on, you're going to put a curtain on a rail, and it's going to go over, and you're going to make that the scariest magic trick we're going to see. Then you're into it, it's like, oh my god, what is behind that spirit cabinet? But it's only one person, but yet Derren makes you believe that you are in a room with a ghost.
Oh yeah,
hidden behind everything else.
I mean, the spirit cabinet is something I do as well, and I don't do it in quite the same way. Derren's is one of the best spirit cabinet routines I've ever seen, because with spirit cabinets, especially the traditional ones that were done at the peak of spiritualism in the 1800s, when the Davenports created them, you would require the medium themselves to go into the cabinet. Whereas Derren uses a volunteer. He uses someone from the audience, which instantly makes it more convincing. The way he does it, and I genuinely have no idea how he does it. I mean, I've got some thoughts on it, as I'm guessing most magicians do, but I don't know how he's done it, because it's phenomenal. It's amazing. Oliver, what about you? What really drew you in about this?
Well, it's the way he challenges himself. I mean, it kind of ties back to some stuff that Ross said earlier, but it's the fact he starts off by saying, I don't believe in this, none of this is real. He then tells his volunteers the same thing, and basically, in a very, very quiet way, dares them to stay objective about what he's going to do, and then does it, and in a variety of different ways, by involving them in different ways, more or less closely to what is supposedly going on within the world of spiritualism. He gets to the point where one of them touches something and screams, and then they're all screaming, and he convinces 12 people who apparently have no predisposition to believe this, and that he specifically told, and who know who he is, that none of this is real, but still gets them to that point. And there's just such a wonderful moment of release at the end when he gets, the best visual display of how his stuff was faked, how the story was faked. And even, as an audience member, that is such a great moment of release, which is amazing when you consider the fact that at no point did he actually tell you that something was going on. And in fact, at several points said that nothing was.
So I think for me, what really draws me in, it's the entire world that he creates within this old hospital. It's not just the tricks themselves, but the way they're done and the way they're staged and the story he weaves. Mentalism, more than I think any other field of magic, is so reliant on the theatre and so reliant on the the performance of the mentalist and the world that they can create, it requires a theatrical mind and perfect showmanship in order to do mentalism. And mentalism grew out of the spiritualist movement of the 19th century. That's where it comes from. So the stuff Derren's doing is as close to pure classic mentalism as you can really get. And it just pulls you in because every element of it is unnerving, is unsettling, is scary. You watch this alone in a darkened room and it's scary. It's a very unsettling experience, and it's just so wonderfully put together. It's so wonderfully told as a story. So there are, I think, 5 segments in it, I would suggest. There's the spirit cabinet, followed by the picture selection, followed by the which includes the word that they get. If you get one person thinking of a city and another person receives that. There's the Ouija board. There is then there's the dark seance. Actually, that's 4, isn't it? Actually, I think that's right. And it builds so well. What did we think? So the climax of it obviously is this dark seance where the lights go out and things start to levitate and move. Now it's shot in night vision. The way it's edited and cut, there are, I would imagine there are reasons why we don't see quite as wide a shot as you would probably like to. But how did that feel watching it? I mean, can you imagine putting yourself in that situation? Because I've only done one dark seance before. It's something I want to do more of. What does that? How was it watching that? I mean, what did we get from that?
Well, I think the benefit that Derren had at his advantage for a lot of things to really drive home the horror and the dread and suspense in that scene was, rather than just doing it pre-recorded and then everybody watching it back, he made the situation live. You know, the whole thing about doing it live and wandering around the building live and all being all done with steady cams and with a live setting and all that sort of thing, it adds to the level of people's disbelief of, well, maybe this is real, maybe there is such a thing as the afterlife and all that sort of stuff, and maybe we can get, disillusioned into it. So when it goes into night vision, and yeah, like the angles that it's pointing at, obviously it's different angles on each corner. Totally understand that from what he was trying to do, because you didn't want to give anything away. Of course. But you forget about it. You do forget, because you're just like, holy shit, this is terrifying. These people are in rooms with ghosts. And if they had callers call in, and they were all saying the exact same thing that happened on the show happened to them in real life, and they were terrified. And part of me just goes, it's that whole suspension of disbelief. Like, did you believe you pushed the glass to the words that was the same on the screen? Did you believe all that? And but you do get wrapped up in it, in the wrapped up element. I think because the live element added to the situation when they were doing the seance, it made it twice as scary, because you're not just watching people having a seance, you feel like you're practically part of it.
Yes, and he encourages you to take part as well. At one point, he tells you, if you're at home, write down letters on a piece of paper or grab Scrabble tiles. And this is a callback, really, to the type of things that Uri Geller used to do. If you remember back in the 80s and 90s when there were telephones, and Uri Geller would come on and he'd say, right, at home now, go and get yourself a spoon out of the cutlery drawer. And I remember one year, I was supposed to be asleep, but my mum knew I was watching this kind of telephone thing. And the Uri Geller bit came on and he said, go and get yourself a spoon. And I was sat there watching, and there's a little knock at the door. My mum just comes in and just hands me a teaspoon. And he says, put it on the TV and focus on it. It didn't work. The spoon didn't bend. But it reminded me.
That's why you've kept trying ever since.
Yes. And if anyone has seen my shows will know that I can now effectively bend a spoon with the power of cheating. And it did remind me of that. It reminded me of the type of thing Uri Geller used to do. And that world of the psychic, of getting people involved. Oliver, you've been to mediumship with me. You've been to a couple of mediumship readings with me. And this is a slightly different setup, obviously, but the whole mediumship possession at the end, it felt very similar. To me, it did. There were elements of similarity.
Yes, definitely. I'm not sure. obviously there's a slightly different perspective, and having seen it with you before and having been to a mediumship demonstration with you, there's a slightly different, like there are slight bits where you can sort of see exactly how this might work, which obviously gives you a less than perfect idea of what this is to experience and what it must be to be in the room at that precise time. But I think it's carried in this case by the people around. It's a slightly different experience. You're not in darkness, and you might you have a slightly different perspective on what is going on. But you definitely do buy the terror and the experience that these people are having.
Absolutely. The dark section of the seance is, I mean, it's developed certainly a lot from the original ideas, because the earlier seances were table knocking seances, or rapping seances, where you would hear the knocks and the spirits, and that's what they kind of started out with the Fox sisters in the 1840s. And seances developed quite a lot over that period. And again, Derren takes some of the best bits of that Victorian seance era. I mean, the Ouija board section, of course, is genuinely fascinating from a entertainment point of view and a psychological point of view. Even though he explains that it's the ideomotor effect. And I've done Ouija board demonstrations for skeptical groups, and I've still had people come up at the end of those sessions genuinely unsettled, even though they know what's going on. Even if you know what's behind it, it's still a really unsettling experience. And knowing it's theatre, I don't think detracts from that one bit.
No, but it is, as someone watching it on television, I do think for me at least, the seance at the end was the one bit where there was a bit more distance there, where you're more involved, at least I was, in the emotional drama that these people are going through, rather than the actual demonstration itself. At least that was the case for me.
Well, again, that comes back to the theatrics of it, doesn't it? The storytelling part, that the storytelling was so good. So, obviously, I am a magician. I don't know how Derren did a lot of the stuff in this. We can only conjecture at some of it, and I don't mind conjecturing, because I think part of the fun of magic is trying to work out how it was done. So, I mean, we know he's lying. He says he's lying. That end dark seance, the possessed woman at the end, do we completely buy the whole "I don't use stooges" argument? For that?
I'm not totally convinced. Her delivery in that moment sounded pre-programmed. You know, it was too polished. It was too well delivered for somebody who was apparently once a child, then the adult age in which she died. You know, and pretty much giving clues to what the end twist of what the letter was going to be when it was revealed. She was convincing enough. I mean, I don't think anybody in there was going to be arguing that was fake, because they were so, you know, the tension of the situation. They were all wound up. They were all freaking out. They were all scared. They were willing to believe anything at that point. So by the time that she's coming out with this fluid, well presented, you know, possession that she was, you know, they are going to be like, oh my God, she's possessed. This is horrendous. She's actually possessed by, you know, this poor woman who was sadly part of a pact, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, like, I would like to have seen it a bit more disjointed, a bit more like this voice was forcing its way out in terms of a possession, rather than it just be, you know, a clean, almost as if she's having that natural conversation with you across the table sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, when we think of possessed mediums giving speeches and spirits speaking through them, we do tend to see them as being in a trance state. And I think that could have tied in a little bit better, because Derren obviously has a connection with hypnotism. So I guess maybe from a theatrical point of view, her being in a trance-like state might have been more compelling. Oliver, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, I have one question. As two people who've seen it more times and presumably remembered what he says at the end, there was a couple of things that Derren said, that she'd said, that I don't remember her saying actually in the thing. There was a couple of bits where it felt to me like he made some things slightly more specific than at least I remembered her saying that. Is that just me misremembering stuff? Or
I actually am not sure. I don't. I think with the ending filling in information, they have got more information. So they've got the letter from the brother. They've got the photographs. So I think you would expect there to be a bit more information given by the ringmaster than you would get from the person sat. I don't necessarily think it detracts from it.
No, it doesn't. But I think those kind of things suggest to me that it might not be a stooge.
Mm-hmm.
But if Derren is having to kind of orientate slightly, then that would suggest that obviously it's more him improvising well rather than having written the lines.
Of course. And wording is very, very important in these things. I've used very manipulative wording at times in the stuff that I do, where I'm technically being honest, but I'm hiding certain things and holding certain things back. Like, not using stooges or actors. For me, I think there can be wiggle room there. But I don't think it matters. I think it's whatever the reasoning is, however this person at the end is delivering that, I think it works on a theatrical level. I think it works on a magic level, and that I think is the most important part of it. So I don't care too much. And I've kind of always held the position that I don't care how magicians do what they do. It's not how they do it that's important. It's the way it's presented to an audience. So if a magician uses a stooge on occasion, I kind of don't mind. It's less interesting if that's how it's always done. But if it's done from time to time on occasion, I kind of don't mind, because it's how it's sold. It's how it's presented. Is what's important. So, but I think that he's completely honest with saying that all 12 of those people going into there are not stooges or actors. I think when it comes to that one woman at the end, I think there's some wiggle room in the definition of stooge and actor, but that's just guesswork on my part. I think the entirety of the piece is so strong that it doesn't matter.
I mean, none of us have actually confronted the possibility that maybe Derren Brown's stooge is an actual ghost who possessed her for a couple of minutes. I think.
See, that's actually not an uncommon accusation leveled at magicians, especially mentalists. I'm not sure if you were there with me in the Isle of Wight when I was doing a gig for a company there, and there was a woman who came up afterwards. I don't know if you remember her saying it, but she came up to me and said, "I know you say you're not psychic, but I think you are a little bit." So it happens. Even if you say outright, this is all trickery, or this is all psychology, or this is done through real world means, whatever those means may be, you do still frequently get people saying, well, you must be psychic, because that's the only explanation they can come to. And it's kind of a nice compliment to kind of hear that. But we are detracting a little bit from the conversation. Ross, what were your first impressions of this when you first saw it, however many years ago?
First saw it, at the time I was convinced that Derren Brown was the devil, and because again I'd never seen anybody doing dark magic like that before, and really pushing the boundaries of making people believe that they're in a haunted video game, or that just by standing as far away from the scene as possible and closing his fist like that, he can make the person feel utter dread and all that sort of thing.
Oh, so, yes, I remember that. Yeah. That's from one of his earlier mind control episodes. That was beautifully well done.
It's a well done trick. So when it was announced that he was doing a live seance and all this sort of thing, and being a horror fan that I am, I just thought, right, I'm going to stay up and watch this because this seems pretty cool. Now again, I've admitted I don't believe in ghosts. I'm not a big believer in ghosts. The irony of that is that my favourite film was about ghosts. But but there was something about, again, I got carried away by the fact that, first and foremost, that Derren Brown is a storyteller. Mm-hmm. He crafted this well-knit and tight story of people being part of a suicide pact in a hospital. So it's like, oh, that's really grim. That's going somewhere dark. And the more it progressed, the colder I got, because I was just like, this is really a well-done little horror short. Mm-hmm. You cannot, it's better than most paranormal, supernatural horror films that are made today, because especially shows like Most Haunted and Ghost Watchers and all that sort of stuff. Because with that, you can smell the insincerity.
I would disagree with you on Ghost Watch. You can smell the insincerity. I think Ghost Watch is a different beast. Most Haunted, definitely, I'd agree with you on.
Yeah, that's insincere down to a T. But it's weird because all the fake ones are more realistic than the ones that are pretending to be real, and they just come across more fake. Because
I would actually go with that. Yeah, I think that people who are pretending as a piece of theatre can be more compelling and convincing than those who are genuinely believing it's real. And I guess this comes back to the medium me and Oliver went to see. That, to be honest, she wasn't particularly very good, was she? She was very, very general in the things she was saying, and very obvious to me, incorporating elements of cold reading into it. And the only time she got particularly good, and I remember mentioning this to Oliver, the only time she got particularly good was when she read people she had already read at previous sessions. And I pointed out to Oliver, that guy she just got 100% of a hit on, she read him at the last one I went to. So
there was also, when she got when things hadn't been going well for a moment, she started telling anecdotes about really good readings she'd had other days.
Yes.
And you're there, from a scientific point of view, it's like you're there, being operated on, and it's going really wrongly, and the surgeon's like, look, I did the same operation the other week, and it went so well. And you're there like, the fact you're telling me this story almost makes it worse, because if you were actually good at your job, you wouldn't have to tell me about this other time.
It reminds me of stand-ups who bomb on stage and they go, the night before this, I was really good. The crowd were loving it. And I was like, yeah, it's the crowd's fault that you're shit right now. Like you're just having a bad day. Well done. Don't gloat in it. Just get it on. You're down. Just like, okay, fine. I've messed up, but I'm going to just keep going anyway.
And that's the thing. I mean, Derren's stuff, and not just Derren's stuff, other performers and magicians I've seen doing similar types of things, have been more compelling and more convincing than anyone I've seen that claims to be doing it for real. Now, that's not to say they aren't doing it for real. Maybe they are, and real psychic powers aren't that good. But when you see people like Derren Brown doing it, Derren Brown is the type of person who can convince you this is entirely real. He can convince you from the moment he steps into that room at the very beginning that it's entirely true. Even though he tells you it's not.
Yeah, he's got such great charisma. Like the fact that, I mean, obviously the secret to a con man is in the name, confidence.
Yeah.
And as long as Derren Brown can openly say, I don't believe in this, but I'm going to make you believe, you're just like, I prove it. And he does.
Yeah, and that's...
And
go on, Oliver.
No, it's the showmanship. It's the story he tells, the way he weaves it, and the setting. This hospital that has apparently been abandoned since the 80s, in which there was a suicide pact. The entire thing just goes together. And so then, in a way, what he actually does, the tricks, all you need them to do is not contradict what he's saying and where the narrative is going, and you're along for the ride.
Oh, absolutely, yes. He takes you right the way along from the very beginning. And it was an interesting kind of little fact in this. One of the people involved in this, one of the 12, a chap called Ian Starkey, I think it is, and he's one of the people who goes into the spirit cabinet. He's one who screams in the spirit cabinet. He would later go on to become one of Derren Brown's creative partners. If from a couple of years later, if you look at the credits of a lot of Derren Brown shows, especially his live ones, you will see Ian Starkey in the credits. So one person not only got a little bit of an experience out of it, but also a wonderful career.
I'm going to bring up something about the story now, because I think only Derren Brown could get away with telling a story like that. With the idea of the suicide pact, because he's so revered with the world of the dark that he could get away with touching on dark subject matter and making it convincing and making it engaging for you as a story. You couldn't imagine somebody like, say, okay, I know he's passed on, but like, imagine Paul Daniels telling like a story like this is like, he has a spirit cabinet routine. His spirit cabinet routine, he paints it up, he makes it a show. He says, this is an old Victorian thing, apparently it's haunted and bloody bloody blah. He makes it like a farcical thing, so that when you watch it, you're amazed by the trick and going, oh, that's pretty clever. Whereas when Derren Brown goes to you, okay, we're in a locked building. This was shut down after this guy here convinced 12 people to kill themselves, and fled and all this sort of stuff. It's like, holy, this is a magic show we're meant to be watching. What's going on? But
one of my favourite things, actually, it's a weird little bit of the story that just adds to the believability of the story. He says that the cult leader survived the suicide pact and later died in a car crash several years later. And it's a weird little addition like that makes it more believable. Oddly, it's more believable that he survived and went on his way than if he'd have died as well.
It's because, odd. Well, like, you can look at the evidence of, like, Charles Manson, because he got caught. Like, he never killed himself. He got caught, and then he became, the most famous villain in the world in prison and all that sort of stuff. Unrightly so.
Well,
Yeah, but I think it makes sense for him to go, the guy never got caught, but he fled, but then he died in a car crash, But it just adds to that level of darkness to the story, where it's kind of like, oh, but they never got their justice.
Oliver, you might be able to confirm this. Jonestown, did the cult leader there in Jonestown survive? I don't think he did.
Yeah, I think he died. But I don't remember. But I agree with what you said. It's the loose end helps make it sell the rest of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that he sets out by trying to make it into an intellectual game, which I guess is where the Paul Daniels thing maybe breaks down. But then he makes it emotional by telling them, you are here in this place where 12 people died, and the person who did it got away with it, and they all died for really bad reasons. And so then I guess your brain, you're no longer on the intellectual side. I guess what Ross was saying, looking at the spirit cabinet going, that's a nice piece of old furniture. And he's being clever with it. You're there sort of, it's the brain's shut off, and it's the emotional response of, this is not a nice place to be in.
So we've been praising it to high heaven. What didn't work? Was there any elements of it that you kind of thought that could have been done differently? It's not as good as the rest of it. I can start. The Ouija board. Now, obviously, the Ouija board did eventually do what it needed to do. It got the name Jane spelled out. But I don't know. For me, the fact that it wasn't actually a traditional style Ouija board, the fact that it was sold as this old antique, when just kind of looking at it, it's kind of doesn't look like that's true. And I don't, obviously he's a showman, it's theatre, it's all a lie, but that for me felt like a slightly less believable one than if he'd have just said, we've got a Ouija kit here. And just, that's more of a theatrical criticism, I think, than anything else. I don't quite think the Ouija board was as compelling as it would be. I mean, I understand why it's done in a round circle. It's easy to film with. But it doesn't look enough like a traditional Ouija board for me. And that kind of took me out of it a little bit. Because obviously I know what Ouija board looks like and what they are, and everyone kind of does. And I don't know, it just kind of didn't quite work for me. That combined with the necessary poor camera work in the dark seance, where you don't quite see the items levitating and flying around, and I think there are probably reasons for that, but it just kind of, for me again, it kind of took you out of it a little bit, because you didn't really see or experience what was happening in that section. But they're the only criticisms I really have it, and they are, I guess, more theatrical criticisms rather than criticisms of the magic or any other element of it. What about you guys?
I'll tell you my criticism of it after the break. That's my main criticism.
Really?
My biggest criticism. It kind of, like, it just separates the suspension of the story when it has the ad breaks. I can understand why they've done it. It's Channel 4, they want to show off the branding that's promoting Channel 4 and stuff like that. But if it was just like, if it was on like BBC and it just went straight through for 45 minutes, you'd be horrified. Like, it would be the most entertainingly horrifying 45 minutes you could ever have, you know? But because there's ad breaks, your suspension of disbelief comes back, and you're kind of like, okay, it's a TV show, I'm watching a TV show, and all this sort of stuff. I'm going to go get a drink and all that sort of thing, where you're kind of like, I would rather have people on the edge of their seat, tense with fear, watching this for the full hour, not knowing when it's going to break. And because there's ad breaks, you know, you are just sort of like, this is really odd. Why would there be ad breaks for a haunted mansion? Ghosts don't need cigarettes. Like, they're dead. So, like, it's just that sort of thing where you're kind of like, yeah, like, I'm all for it. It's really good, but do we really need ads? I kind of want to see what happens next. You know, like, so that's my main problem. I just hated the ad breaks. I just wanted to see what was happening.
Which I suppose makes it a little better watching it incomplete. Although it does still have the whole "I'll be back in a bit" to it, I believe. So, yeah. What about you, Oliver?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to correct Ross that actually ghosts do need cigarettes, because the ghost of Mark Twain in, I think, 1916 said that they still do get cravings for cigarettes. If you've smoked in life, then you do still want cigarettes in the afterlife, and you'd kind of want to get near smokers to be able to ingest that in some way. So, you know, I'm afraid there is proven scientific basis for the fact that ghosts do actually need cigarette breaks.
Yes, so just to clarify that for the people watching, that's Oliver, you've been researching mediums who contact famous dead writers, haven't you?
Yes, so that...
And there's a piece about that coming out soon.
I think I understand Ross's problem with that. I think they manage it quite well, because they managed to get in and out by having the testimony of, real people able to go into that. So I think that slides in and out reasonably well, and it gives you time to think of, these people going for a cup of coffee and then something spooky happening and then calling them up. So I think that's handled quite well. I completely agree with Ash on the Ouija board. Watching that, especially, I remember the detail. He said they brought it in from Pennsylvania. It comes from an occult museum in Pennsylvania, and I'm there thinking, those look like cards that have never been used. Yeah. It's also white and pristine. Did you really need to go to Pennsylvania to get this? The other thing, and I'm completely, this is probably going to create an uproar, but the 12-person suicide pact, I find slightly too much, just because that seems like something that would be big enough that if you were a Londoner and there was a hospital in the middle of London, you at least might question the fact that you've never heard about this. Well, someone basically becoming a serial killer, because I think a serial killer is just more than 3, in the middle of London at this hospital, then getting away with it, and then this place being abandoned within a year or 2 later. That just seems like something. It seems to me slightly too big, but at the same time, he needs something big for the storytelling. And if I was in the hospital at the time, that would probably still be quite unnerving. So I'm willing to admit that maybe that's just me.
They may not have heard of it. I mean, remember when there were surveys done and people think Winston Churchill was fake and Sherlock Holmes was real, and there are still people who think Sherlock Holmes is real. So I can understand how, if it had been left hanging, that maybe it would have been a bad idea to go with that story. But in that moment, I think you get away with it because people don't question those things.
Obviously it worked really well. Everyone by the end of that special was terrified. So I do not think I can actually point at Derren Brown and say, you messed up with this. Obviously it worked. It's just a minor quibble afterwards, like you said.
Yeah. Do you think something like Derren Brown's Seance, if it was made today, how do you think it would be received by an audience today?
I think there would be people who would want to see it. I think people still like suspending their disbelief when it comes to the supernatural, because people like to be entertained in that regard. There are people who like looking at these dark and spooky things and want to see whether or not that it was real or not. Like my sister, she came to see Keep Calm and Scary On in the Fringe 3 years ago. And I told her, right, we're going to go see a show. It's got ghosts in it, so be warned. And we went to go see it. And on the way home, she was convinced it was real. And I just had to keep saying, I just said to her, look, I know the guy, he's a mate. I know it's not real. I'm not explaining to you how he does it because I don't want to disrespect the guy, but please stop going on. It's not real. Like all that sort of thing. But I do think stuff like that does work because, people like to get caught up in a little ghost story like that. They like to be caught up in that world because they want to really feel as if there's a ghost out there and feel as if there is something out there for that regard. And I personally would like to see Derren Brown come back to do dark material again. Like, I'm bursting for it.
I agree.
And if he was to return with a sequel to Seance, like something darker, something more unexpected, that would be just brand new. Because I'm a huge fan of the TV show Inside Number 9, which is written by Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith of the League of Gentlemen. And they did a live special on Halloween of their show in which the TV studio that they were filming at was possessed by ghosts. And, as it starts, you're watching it going, okay, it's just going to be a normal episode of Inside Light. But as it gets on, it gets more and more haunting and traumatic and scary and brilliant. You're just like, damn, stuff like this is still working. Stuff like that is still entertaining. It would have to be, I would like to see it done differently. Like, if he was to do another live seance, but done it on, like, a viral aspect. Like, say he went live on YouTube or something, like an internet sort of thing, and it became a viral thing. I think that would work better in its favour.
Okay. Oliver, what about you? What do you think? Would it still work today as a new piece that was created?
I think so. I think it would have to be slightly more cinematic. You'd need sort of a more slightly better cameras. I mean, you said that for the seance, but I think in general, and a bit more of a sort of larger scope to everything to escape from that kind of boxed TV thing. But I think people, I mean, you still, I guess it's kind of died off a bit in the last few years, but the love of found footage that has existed for the last 2 decades means that people are still willing to sit in front of something which, even though they know on several levels that it's not real, has some kind of appearance of something real. And I think as well as it didn't look like something made cheaply for TV, I think people would definitely be ready to indulge in that kind of storytelling and that kind of story on, I'd have thought, a very similar level to the people who originally watched it.
So I agree. I think it would work very well today. And I think it would be a very important thing today because if we look at the history of spiritualism, it peaks at times of national and global crisis. During the American Civil War, spiritualism peaked. During the First World War, spiritualism peaked again. That's when they started using Ouija boards more commonly. During the Second World War, it peaks again. That's when we have people like Helen Duncan and Rebecca York, who are the last 2 people to be tried under the Witchcraft Act. And we have all of this happening. So we do tend to see a peak. And I think there was one after 9/11 as well. We tend to see these peaks in spiritualism and psychic belief around times of great crisis. And right now, we are in a global pandemic. So I am expecting over the next year or so to see another peak in spiritualism. And I don't mind if that's giving people hope. I'm good friends with people who are spiritualists, and I'm a big fan of spiritualism. It's when people start taking advantage, when people start to manipulate those who are suffering, that I have an issue. And I know a lot of people in spiritualism who take the exact same position as well. So I expect we will see a peak in psychic belief and psychic phenomena, and a peak in the less desirable and rather nasty manipulators coming out of the woodwork. And so I think things like Derren Brown Seance is a good antidote to that. And so I think it's important in this day and age, more so than it is important for entertainment. It's important, I think, for people to just see the alternate side.
At the same time, though, if that was kind of the motive, I think you'd need to push it away slightly from the Victorian aspect, because Derren Brown does pretty much, several times point out that we are recreating a Victorian-style seance, and in Victorian seances they had this, and the Ouija board dates back to this, and so on. Whereas if you had that kind of message, I think you would need to present it as a 21st century type of event, rather than as something that is looking back at the past, where you can have your goggles on and be like, haha, look at those silly Victorians and the things they believed in.
Okay, that's fair. That's a fair enough comment.
I think, a modern day type of seance would work well because, I think like Roald Dahl said it best himself. He said the best ghosts aren't seen, they're felt. And, in that regard, you could still bring something that in a new way where you don't have to rely on the past. You don't have to rely on old techniques. You can modernize it with a new story, because you don't have to be dead for hundreds and hundreds of years to be a ghost. Ghosts, to quote Egon Spengler in the Ghostbusters video game, new people die all the time. That's that thing. People can exist anywhere, all that sort of thing. However, the mystique of it being a history and having a backstory and all that sort of stuff works for some people, particularly if it is in, say, an old era and all that sort of stuff. But it just depends on what story you're wanting to go for it. You can pretty much turn all of that stuff, you could take all of that and make that a thing, as long as you knew that you were grounded in the reality of what you were trying to convey.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, I think definitely. Sorry, use history within the story itself. I just think that Derren Brown kind of uses a framing device when he talks about recreating a Victorian seance and stuff, which would allow some people, therefore, to discount some sort of more modern lessons in terms of, gullibility and vulnerability. Whereas, if you were wanting to do it with people walking away to some kind of point, I think a way of doing it would be to present it as, "Hi guys, I'm a 21st century medium, and today this is what we're going to do," and then at the end going, "Actually, that was all bollocks," rather than explicitly going in with we are recreating something, which kind of implies that it's not really a contemporary problem.
See, now I want to see a show where the medium is a mid-90s surfer dude. Because that was what it thought of when you said that. The whole dude thing was like, this is Pauly Shore, the medium.
Come on, guys. Yeah, all right, okay.
All right.
Yeah, man. We're going to do some Ouija board, fellas. Yeah, going to have a good time.
Smoke a Ouija.
Yeah, we're going to contact the spirits through this, baby.
Whoa. Is that a ghost above you, or is the room just getting really smoky?
Well, you know how Mark Twain says you need to be around smokers to have that? I was around my barley, man. Best years of my life. Woo!
I think for science, we have to do a seance where everybody is stoned. I think for science, we have to.
For science.
After
You'll get into a debate where they're sitting around the table, though, and they're doing their Ouija board, and they're going to a big existential breakdown of what they think the whole meaning of Ouija boards are.
Oh God!
Are they making a spell out of our life? Is this what it's all about?
So Oliver, you've seen how long it can sometimes take to get words out of the Ouija board. Can you imagine people doing that if they were stoned?
I think if you were seriously doing this, you'd have to film it in two parts, where you just film what goes on and then wait 2 days and then ask people to tell you what happened. And then you can just have the contrast of, people sitting there for about half an hour with nothing happening compared to, oh man, it went so crazy. Like, it was just spinning and there was so much weird stuff going on. I mean, I went places, man.
I should also point out that you have a hard time wanting to perform in front of audience members that are drunk at midnight on Halloween. You honestly think that performing in front of stone people is going to make it any easier?
Hell yes.
Yeah, good point. But no, I think there's still a market for the whole spiritualism. There's still a market for ghost stories. People like to be entertained by that sort of stuff. And Derren Brown proved it. He proved that with Seance. People like a good ghost story. They like to be taken into a ghost reality,
Yeah.
It just has to be authentic. You have to believe in the story that you're telling so that you can come across as believable. Even if you know that it's a hoax, you still have to make it out that you know it's real.
So, usually in this series, we end by giving the show or that we watched points based on various factors. Now, the factors we have don't really apply too much to this. And also, there's 3 of us, so that will also skew the point system as well, because it's supposed to be out of 40. So, how's the fairest way to do this? Because it's supposed to be out of 40. I'll tell you what, I won't score on this one. I won't give score points on this one.
Well, Ash, if there's 3 of us, you just have to divide the finished score by 3 and then multiply it by 2, and that will reach a score out of 40.
Okay. Yeah, that works. Maths works. Okay, so...
Ladies and gentlemen, live maths.
I know. That's a reference to my show. So, the way we're going to do this is because there are 3 of us. We're going to give the points as per usual, but then we're going to divide by 3 and then multiply by 2 to give us the total out of 40. So the first point we usually give marks out of 4 is... what is the first point we usually give marks out of 4?
Applicability of the medium to a horror story.
Okay, so how appropriate was what was being done out of 4 points? How appropriate was what was being done to the idea of horror? I think 4. I mean, it was pure spook. It was pure classic horror. So I think it was incredibly appropriate and possibly the most appropriate thing we've so far discussed within this series, because it is specifically horror. Oliver?
Yeah, I'd go with 4 as well, from the sort of story being told, the format, having it as a kind of, with the cameras being acknowledged and a part of the process, giving it a kind of, documentary look, the live aspect, all of it. Yeah, 4 out of 4 for me.
Ross?
I'm going to give it a 4. It's a good old-fashioned ghost story with a narrator, with 12 unsuspected people, and spooky things happen. You could pretty much just T for T. That is classic storytelling, horror, ghost storytelling down to. And you can look at that and compare it to fake stuff. You compare it to realism. You can do all that sort of stuff. You're still going to be entertained by it. Definitely one of the best ghost stories I've watched in a long time, and I still continue to watch it and enjoy it.
So the next section is, we usually call it body count, but I think the better way of describing it is threat factor. I think it's probably the better way to describe it, threat factor of the world that they exist in. And obviously there's a dozen people dead, and there's spirits and entities coming through. If it's being played as a piece of theatre, so obviously that loses an element of the threat factor. But people are genuinely unnerved. People are genuinely scared. People are genuinely feeling threatened there. And that makes it even more impressive, I think. So I think I'm going to give 3 for that. Oliver?
I'd also go with 3. Like I said earlier, I have very, 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 very slight reservations about the neatness of 12 people committing this kind of act in a hospital. That seems both slightly contradictory as well as too neat at the same time to me. So that is going to be my excuse to give it 3 out of 4.
Okay. Ross?
Yeah, I'll give it 3 out of 4, mainly just for the girl's performance at the end of the seance. Just because it takes away from the believability of what I was going through, just because of how quick she was to be a possessed person, and how well pronounced her dialogue was, and how well delivered her, language was, and all that sort of thing. It would make more sense if she was choking on the words in a daisical way, rather than just coming out as if it's natural for her to talk like that. Because, you're talking against control. Somebody else is talking for you. That's not your voice that's coming out your mouth. That's a different person altogether. So it makes sense if it was a different voice all around, rather than say just your normal speaking voice. But that other than that, it's a very minor one. But I still give it a 3.
Okay.
Sorry, slight question for Ross. I know you've mentioned the voice, which obviously makes it different, but you've also mentioned the speed at which she changes. Why do you call Stooge on that bit at the end, but you don't have any issues with the spirit cabinet and the 2 who go in? Because there are quick results there as well.
There are, but I think just because throughout the entirety of the episode, the spirit cabinet was enough to sort of test the waters to make you go, this is what you're going to expect. So drop your subversions here. This is what's going to happen. And, even with the whole over-the-camera shot, you could tell that that helps that suspension of disbelief as well, because you're kind of like, yes, we're seeing it from their angle. They don't believe it. That's a pretty nifty trick. So, even though they're like, I don't know what happened and all that sort of thing. So I'm okay for that logic. I just have a problem with, say, the girl at the end, just because there are a couple of shots of that woman in the seance, and she is terrified, genuinely horrified of her wits. And then suddenly, without even missing a beat of horror, she just goes straight into the daze, like almost hypnotic look that she has. It was easy. It's easy to sort of go with the quickness of the spirit cabinet because we see it in front of us. It's a prop. It's a gag. It's a gimmick. We can see how that's done. Whereas with the person, we're kind of like, really, like, you know, possession is a different ballgame altogether. There's two personalities conflicting in one in there.
Yeah, it's slightly less believable, I think. And also, I've seen in one of the live DVDs him do the cabinet as well. So I think that helps me find it more believable as not. So the next one might be a difficult one. The next one is about the villain. It's how compelling or convincing was the villain. I don't think there really is a villain in this piece. I think an antagonist, the closest we get to it, is, I don't know, is Derren both protagonist and antagonist in his own work?
Oh yeah, I'd think so. He is he is both protagonist and antagonist in that story, because he gives you the believability to make you think that this is all going to be fake, and this is all a game, and blah 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 blah. But then as it goes on, he's slowly but surely driving these people to paranoia and fear, and he's doing it with a smirk on his face.
So
he knows exactly what he's doing.
So
I guess it also ties down to the body, ties into the body count, but I guess we could also say the antagonist is kind of the history of the building itself. That provides a lot of the threat in terms of it's not just what's going to happen, but how that ties into, you're talking about not just communication with the dead, but communication with people who had very tragic ends, and obviously a lot of unresolved stuff going on there, which sets off an atmosphere which is different to then what actually happens in terms of the routines.
Yeah. So this one's a little trickier for me to mark. Oliver, what will you give this out of 4?
I'd say I'd give it a. It's difficult because I could give it a high score, but then I feel like I'm giving it a high score for the similar reasons that I gave other elements a high score, like the body count or some of the upcoming criteria.
Fair. That's fair.
So maybe that would be unfair. So I'm going to go with 2.
You're going to go with 2?
I'm going to go with 2. It's not a problem. The villainy of the thing isn't a problem, but I feel like what makes it work is part of different criteria, so it would be unfair to give points multiple times for the same thing.
Okay. Ross, what about you?
I'm going to give Derren a high 4. Again, just because of how engaging he was as a storyteller and as a host for this night, while at the same time coming across as being the nice guy when realistically he's the main reason all this bad stuff is happening in the first place.
Okay, I'm going to split the difference and give a 3 because I think you both make very good points. So the next one is how memorable is it? And I can't give it anything less than a 4 because this is something that has stayed with me from the moment I saw it. It has remained with me and been such an important part of what I do as a performer that I can't give it anything less than a 4. Ross?
I'm giving it a 4. It's everything about it. I remember it vividly. I remember the girl screaming by herself in the room, screaming at nothing, but they made her believe there was something in there. I remember the creepy, almost carousel-like music that plays when they're showing the tape of the woman that's on, that sort of thing. It still lingers with me. I remember the smirk Derren gives when he's walking away for the last time towards the big end reveal, just to show that he'd planned this whole thing out. Yeah, it's one of the best live ghost stories you'll ever watch. I'll reference it somewhere in one of my stories if I ever get round to writing something about this sort of thing. I've always wanted to write and do a seance like this, with that level of intensity. And yeah, I think it's a 4. It's an outstanding piece of television and Derren Brown's best piece.
Oliver?
I'm going to give it a 3. I've really enjoyed it both times I've watched it, but on the other hand, the second time I watched it, it took me 5 minutes to go, oh shit, I have seen this before. So I think that loses a point since I literally forgot that I'd already seen it for a few minutes.
Fair enough.
So yeah, 3 out of 4.
And finally, scariness. This one's a bit more tricky because I've seen it so many times it doesn't scare me anymore. But also, again, I think being a mentalist and working in that area, knowing how some of the things work under the hood as well takes away a certain amount of that. So I have to try and think back to how I felt when I first saw it. Which I think it gets the atmosphere right. I think it gets everything right. It is a genuinely unnerving ghost story. And people are going to criticize me for this, but I'm going to give it a 3. I think I'm only not giving it a 4 because it didn't quite scare me as much as my favorite horror movie, which is The Changeling, which also deals with seances. So that's I'm going to give that 3. Oliver?
I'm going to give it a 3 as well. Obviously, through my work with you, I do know a few things about what is going on, which therefore could make my 3 unfair. But on the other hand, I had a control group the second time I watched it. I watched it with some other people who didn't know any of that stuff and slightly more believe this stuff slightly more than I do. And I don't think it was the scariest thing that they'd seen, even though they were predisposed to believe in that kind of stuff. So yeah, 3 out of 4 for me.
Ross?
I'm gonna give it a 3. I don't find supernatural stories or stories with ghosts and seances and stuff like that scary. They're entertaining by all regards of means. And in the case of Derren Brown, it's hard for me to watch a horror film and get genuinely scared because obviously I've watched so many of them, and I'm a huge horror fan and I don't get scared of them, but I still love them. But in the case of Derren Brown's seance, as much as I wasn't scared by it, I can see how somebody who wasn't used to that sort of stuff could get scared by it. And yeah, it's scary for an audience of people who want to believe in the supernatural. Or what? Yeah. So yeah, I give it a 3.
Okay, in which case, those added together, divided by 3 and multiplied 2 to give us a score out of 40, it gives us 33.3, which I don't like playing around with 0.3s. I'm going to round that down to 33. So that gives Seance a score of 33 out of 40, which at the time of recording, I think is the highest score anything has yet got. I think Derren Brown's Seance is so far the best example of horror, not horror.
Do you remember how much that I believe wasn't Hound of the Baskervilles the Hammer version in the 30s? Do you remember how much that was?
So Hound of the Baskervilles, no, that was 25.
The Hammer one was 25.
Yes, the Hammer one was 25.
It's a good adaptation, the Hammer Hound of the Baskervilles as well.
Yeah, it was a very good film, but yeah, no, we gave 25 to the Hammer Hound of the Baskervilles. So now wherever this episode goes out, it's going to have to go out after the Hammer episode.
No, you can cut that out if you want. You can, yeah.
Good point.
You can just cut it out.
But yeah, no, that if we just took mine and Oliver's alone, we would have got 32. Took mine and Ross alone, we'd have got 33. So if we'd have taken 35 if we'd taken mine and Ross, 32 if we'd taken mine and Oliver, 33 if we'd taken Oliver and Ross. So yeah, I think 33, 32, 33, 35, that works out. That's about the fair score. Okay, so Ross and Oliver, thank you very much for joining us for another episode of Horror Not Horror. Ladies and gentlemen at home.
Thank you.
Hey, no, thanks for coming along. Ladies and gentlemen at home, please remember to like, share and subscribe, and please do have nightmares. Good night.
There you go, folks.